The face of President Trump's now disbanded voter fraud panel is claiming a tentative victory in the Kansas governor Republican primary. With President Trump's support, Kansas Secretary of State Kris Kobach is ahead of incumbent Governor Jeff Colyer by less than 200 votes in a race that is currently too close to call. Kobach is one of the country's leading proponents of stricter voter ID laws, but the commission he led for the president found no evidence to support claims of widespread voter fraud, according to documents given to the Associated Press last week. At a press conference today, Kobach stressed the need for Kansas Republicans to move forward while waiting for provisional ballots to be counted.
It is imperative that the Republican Party not stand still for a week. We must begin running the race that is before us. This is a tentative victory, and that I am carrying the baton for this first week with the full knowledge that I may hand the baton to Jeff if the provisional ballots change the outcome.
Bryan Lowry joins me from Kansas City to discuss that race and others from last night. Bryan is the lead political reporter for the Kansas City Star. I want to start with this, Bryan, real quick. Kris Kobach is claiming a tentative victory despite being ahead by less than 200 votes. How do you see the rest of this race playing out?
Well, that's the key, is that the race has not ended. You heard the Secretary of State himself describe how first the counties need to count the provisional ballots. Governor Colyer put out a statement today saying they intend to make sure all of those ballots are counted. And then even then, after the provisional ballots are counted, we could see this go into a recount process. So one of the things that we are looking at the start this morning is how that recount process would work. And it actually would be Kobach's office, since he's the top election official in the state of Kansas, which would have authority over any statewide recount. So that's one thing we're going to have to figure out, is whether he recuses himself, steps away from that process to allow it to move forward. But Republicans are under a lot of uncertainty this morning. The Kansas Senate president, who is a Republican from Wichita, compared it to the Bush v. Gore situation from 2000. It's really a new phenomenon for Kansas to go into the general election with this kind of uncertainty about the dominant party in the state.
So, Bryan, how much did Kobach's ties to President Trump affect the race?
It certainly played into the race. The president tweeted his endorsement of Kobach the day before the official primary day, but it was after early voting had already started in Kansas, which may have muted that effect. Kobach has really associated himself closely with Trump for the past 2 years. He was the only statewide official to endorse Trump in 2016 ahead of the Kansas caucuses, served on his transition team, led a now disbanded presidential commission on voter fraud. So Kobach had Trump very much at the forefront of this race. Even before that endorsement, Donald Trump Jr. had come to the state twice to hold fundraisers for him. And the rhetoric is very similar to Trump. So you can bet that many of the Trump voters, hardcore Trump voters, went out for Kobach. And we're still kind of trying to figure out what the effect of that tweet was, whether that maybe tweet could explain that slim margin if Colyer would have prevailed if not for that tweet.
Another Kansas race getting a lot of attention, especially national attention, is the Democratic primary in the 3rd District. Former MMA fighter Sharice Davids won her race against Brent Welder, who was backed by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If Davids wins against incumbent Kevin Yoder, she'd make history as one of the first Native American women in Congress. Does she have a shot here?
She definitely has a shot. This is a district that a lot of national pollsters are looking at as a potential toss-up. It's been a top target for Democrats since the start of the cycle. This is a district that Hillary Clinton won in 2016 by a narrow margin. So what the DCCC was saying before the winner was announced was that any candidate would have a strong chance against Kevin Yoder, the incumbent Republican in this district. And Davids, as you point out, she would be a you can see we're an active newsroom. She would be one of the first Native American women in Congress. She would also be the first LGBT person to represent the state of Kansas at either the state or federal level.
All right, we're okay with the noise in the background. It just wouldn't be a newsroom without the noise, right? Final question for you. Missouri Senate primaries went about as expected. Incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill and State Attorney General Josh Hawley both won easily. Which issues will be central to their race in November?
Missouri election officials got to go to bed a lot earlier last night than Kansas officials. Josh Hawley is really focusing on the U.S. Supreme Court vacancy in this race. He has really hammered McCaskill on that, has suggested that she's going to vote against the president's pick, Judge Kavanaugh. That is going to be an issue that he really has central in this race. McCaskill is going to play up her bipartisanship, the areas where she has worked across the aisle. And some of the niche issues that they are choosing are identical, actually. So this is going to be a race where sometimes the candidates are saying very similar things on things like the opioid crisis and human trafficking, these niche issues that both of them have staked out some ground while in office. So really, I think if you're going to have something that's front and center, it probably is this issue of the U.S. Supreme Court vacancy.
All right, Bryan Lowry of the Kansas City Star. Bryan, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.